Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh my God.
I'm here.
Come on, guys. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Welcome to our lecture of today. We're gonna talk about abortions, and it's gonna be done by our friend Marco. But before, as we always do, Daniel is gonna do the initial reading for us, and I was gonna do the prayer. Company.
Good morning.
Good
morning. Today I'm going to be reading the book Happy Life. The opportunities of moral improvement that life allows us should be taken advantage of wisely and immediately. The march of time is inevitable, and an occasion neglected is lost forever. Time and wind never come back. Thus, it is a liberating lesson to utilize every opportunity for inner growth. Stay alert in order to take the most advantage of the hours of your earthly existence.
Dear God, give us the blessing of the knowledge, the love, the patience, and the open our hearts to what we are here to receive. Please involve Marco in a forum that can help him to give the right words with the right message. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming here this beautiful, sunny, long weekend day. So today we're going to be talking about abortions, and first of all, I have to say this is a very controversial topic, right? In a way that society has polarized along basically two possibilities, right? It's either you're pro-life or pro-choice. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But there's a lot of discussions going on, right? Particularly after happening in the United States, that the rights of abortion have been severely compromised by the Supreme Justice decisions. And then states have now been changing the way the law is applied. In Canada, we have a very different scenario where we basically, it is legalized in any scenario, basically. There's really no law against it or regulating it. So it's the state jurisdiction to decide, and the parents and doctors to decide when to do and when not to do. And we have also many of us from Brazil, which has the other spectrum, which has very long-standing legislative laws that regulate the process of the procedures of abortion. Now, what we're going to talk about today and how is Spiritism looking at all of this, right? So how do we in Spiritism understand what abortion is and the right to life, right? And Allan Kardec cannot be more clear about this, right? So in question number 880, Allan Kardec can say, which is the first of all natural rights of humans, right? So what is the first natural right? The spirits are going to answer. The right to stay alive. Right? So there's no option, there's no different interpretations, right? And then because of this, a lot of people started to think, well, but what does being alive mean, right? And that is there's a lot of scientific, legal discussions and arguments about when does life start, right? And we're going to be talking about this today, okay? So references there, we're talking using Spirit's book, many questions there specifically about it. The evolution of two worlds and planetary transition, right? If you guys want to follow on this, okay? Also, the Federação Espírita Brasileira, Brazilian Spirit Federation, has a lot of information available online if you guys want to read more about it. So that helps quite a bit. So, okay. So let's look at some interesting things that we can see in Spiritist literature that help us, right, understand. Right? So Spirit's book, question number 340, there's this interesting passage, right, that I really like to talk about, right? Because us, right, Spirit, we like a traveler embarking on a dangerous voyage. Like imagine us free in the spiritual world, embarking on this journey where we're going to be tied to the body, living under constriction of the physical world, right? And not knowing if we'll meet, or us will meet death on the waves ahead. I like this because, we tend to see, from this perspective, we tend to see death or the discarnation, right, as the same thing, right? So we're going into this journey, we will know what's going to happen. Obviously, in Spiritism, we know now a lot more about what happens afterwards, but for most people, it's like this, that completely dark, unknown territory, right? From the discarnation. But it's interesting when we're incarnating, the other perspective, it's kind of the same thing, but more scary, right? Because we're gonna forget a lot about what we've done in the past, right? Everything we've studied and practiced when we're there in the spiritual world to come back, we kind of have it there in the back of our minds, but it's not clear, right? We're gonna have some references like here, like the spiritual centers, and that will guide us, right? We have implanted the seeds, right, inside our minds that we can follow, like a beacon of the laws of God. But in general, when we incarnate, we're going to be in a Spirit's book saying to us, it's like a traveler embarking in the dangerous voyage for them, right? Not knowing what's going to happen. Now, it's interesting because when we're talking about abortion, like we're talking about something that has happened right at that voyage, right at that moment where the voyage is starting, right? So that makes things a lot more complicated for the incarnated spirit, but also for everyone involved, right? And the consequences can be quite severe as we can probably think, right? Now, going back to that question, right? So, if we ask, going back to that idea about life, right? The control of life, right? But if you ask anyone today, right? Anyone, and say, do you think people have the rights to live, right? I think most people would say, of course, right? That's an obvious question, right? But then those who argue whether, abortions should be done, should be allowed or not, they use that argument of when life starts, right? To justify their point of view, right? So, fortunately for us in the Spirit's book, right, question number 344, there's a very clear answer for that question, right? So life starts from the moment of conception, as you can see there. The spirit designated to inhabit a given body is connected already. But look how interesting that is. So Spiritism gives us a lot more perspective, right? Because it's not about, some people say, well, you need a heartbeat, right, to consider it alive. But the reality is that we as a spirit are already connected to that moment, even before, like, you can look at the spiritual literature and you find this is quite interesting, that the incarnatory process, we as a spirit, right, we're going to be already introduced to our parents, right, even before conception occurs, right? So even before it actually happens, we as a spirit are already connected, we engage, we're having meetings, there's incarnatory plannings, we're getting prepared for that. So it's not random, right? Even before all that starts, right? And then after we're already all prepared, the parents have meetings with us as a spirit incarnating, and we go to the spiritual world, we talk about it, the mentors chat, and then there's spirits that are going to take care of the preparation of the new body, right? To select the gametes that will actually form a new body. who change things to make sure that we receive a body that is correct for us, right? So all this is happening, right? Even before conception happens, right? And then when the moment of conception, which is really the moment where, the gametes, right, will connect to each other, creating zygote, right, which is the very first cell, right, of our bodies. That cell is already committed, right, to develop. So, and we as a spirit now are tied to it. So if you consider life, and this is interesting because now from the spiritual perspective, that cell has the fluidic energies, right, that allow it to live. The cell is living. It has all the path, the book to know where to go and how to divide through our body. And the real living thing, which is us, right, as a spirit, is already not aimed there because obviously physically it's impossible. But we're connected. We're fully connected to every little organelle or every little bit of that cell. So for every sense, that is when life starts, right? Now it's interesting because there's obviously some science evidence for that. There's a lot of scientists that believe in exactly the same thing. And there's a lot of evidence now from Spiritism too, right, and other religions, right, that endorse that concept. And now the spirits are going to come to us and actually confirm that, right? So we're already connected by a fluidic tie, as you can see there, right? And which gets tighter and tighter until the instant the child is born. So the newborn cry announces that completeness of that process, right? So it's a process, right? You can imagine that, a spirit like us, which has such a complex, very spiritual body, right? And the way to connect to that cell, the process develops as the cells continue to develop in the womb, right? So every cell will connect to the spirit that connects to the spirit, right? And that full connection occurs at the moment of birth. And it continues because it's not done yet, right? So we also have evidence that, after about 7 years of age or so, that's when now that body is fully capable of allowing the spirit to manifest everything. So it creates a complete direct connection with that body and spirit. So the spirit has now full control, right? And why is that important? Because that's when a lot of the traits from the spirit starts to show, right? So there's changes in behavior, there's changes in, certain skills, right? Certain things starts to be more clear to us, right? That are looking from the outside. And it's also helpful because for the little baby, the child that is like from 0 to 7, because the spirit is relatively restricted in what it can manifest because of that interaction, it's easier for us to love the kid, right? You guys can kind of imagine if you have your old enemy incarnating as his son, right? And from age 1, that enemy is able to show exactly what he feels about you. It will be very hard, right, to have an instant connection with the baby, right? It will be like, oh, baby, yeah. It's like all this fight's going to imagine that, right? It will be quite a difficult. And so it allows us to engage and love completely free and not remembering all the past between us. And also at the same time allows the development of that spirit. So it's perfection, right? So so there's no doubt, both from a scientific point of view and from a spiritual point of view, that actually the connection starts at a single cell, right? When the first cell connects. Right? So that creates interesting views for us, right? Because then you can start to think that, well, abortion can occur basically anything that happens after that first cell, right, is ready to go, is considered abortion, right? Even like if you take a pill the next day, right? The idea that you can take the abortive pills the day after what happened. So technically speaking, that is abortion, right? The same way, right? Also creates some other interesting perspectives, right? So if we know already that first cell, it will be developing into a fully incarnated spirit later on, the perfection of the creation and God and the spirits that help mediate that process will eventually stop the process of if one of those cells do not fit the criteria, or it's not prepared, or there's significant errors in the development of that first cell, our own bodies will get rid of it, right? And that's how planned that happens. There actually are incarnating spirits that have to go through the process of a miscarriage, right? Sometimes it's actually determined to do that way. Sometimes the spirit is so reluctant to incarnate that it can actually disrupt the process of that single cell development, so you have miscarriage, right? But sometimes too, the energies from the mother and the parent and the people around can also influence the development of that single cell. That actually creates a problem, and then it dies, right? And then there's miscarriage, right? So miscarriages, which is not the topic of today, there are many reasons why it can happen, but it tends to happen in that early process. And that happens actually quite often, right? Some people, some evidence in science show that the percentage of early miscarriage is actually much higher than, right? So that they happen so early that you don't realize, right? So, okay, so that is a summary, right, of that very early moment, right? So let's see. Interesting. Right, so what is it? What are we talking about today, right? So abortion, by definition, right, is the termination of pregnancy and removal of the embryo or the fetus, like at any time in development, right? So there's obviously in different countries and different legislations, right? There's different ways of performing these procedures, right? For example, in Canada, there is an entire network of physicians and hospitals and programs that will perform it in a safe way. So it's one of the safest medical procedures if you think about just on the medical side of things, right? But it can also be extremely unsafe if it's not done in a proper way, right? So much so that there's a high mortality risk, right, for the mother, or if you're performing unsafe abortions, right? And this is going to come in what we call a public health discussion that's going to come. That's another perspective, right, of abortion that we're going to talk about, right? So almost every country will allow abortion to save the mother's life, right? It's like 97% of countries. And that's important, right? Because, even in Spiritism, we're going to talk about it, the spirits actually refer to that as one of the critical situations where that it's obviously preferable, right, to save the mother's life than the fetus life. And we're going to talk about when Kardec mentioned that in a minute, right? So in Canada, right, abortion is technically legal in any stage, right, of development. And regardless really of the reason and the context, right? That is shocking for a lot of us to think about it, right? Now, every province and every health system has developed guidelines, right, to deal with this, right? But technically, even at very late stage with a perfectly developing fetus, that can still be done, right? So this is number from 2018, but obviously this is a lot more now, like old, right? But it's 85,000 abortions, 85,000. Right? And 90% of them are performed the first trimester, which is the most common way of doing this, right? Now, according to the World Health Organization, there's about 56 million abortions performed each year in the world. And about half of them are done in an unsafe way that comes through the public health component of this. Okay. Now, if you think about numbers, right? And if you believe, as we believe in Spirit, that life starts even like the very, very beginning, the very first connection happens in the single cell. So there's there's more, say 56 million a year, right? This is more than many diseases that we're so scared about, right? Infectious disease and, certain natural disasters that call our attention so much, right? We think about, oh, there's a massive something happening, it's like 4,000 people die, which is shocking. We're going to be completely shocked about it. But we tend not really know about the fact that this is happening at the same time, right? So it gives another perspective for us to think about, right? So the importance of actually talking about this, right, openly, because that's the only way, we can start to change things, right? But at the same time, we cannot change things like now, I cannot go around and grab someone who defends the choice, shake them by their heads, right? Slap them with a picture of a dying fetus and making them change, right? This is not the way to do it, right? Because that will create a polarization that is actually damaging this other than helping, right? And that's something that we should change. Okay? Right. Okay. And we talked about that, so the question 880, right? So what is the person's natural right, which is the right to stay alive? So that is obviously clear and there's no question about it, right? But now, what are some issues that revolve around the concept of abortion, right? In the surveys that were done before in science, right, asking people like, why are you considering doing an abortion? Right? A couple of things will come up very high. So impact in mother's life, obviously, like financial things, right? That's a big one, right? For example, problems with partner, with family, right? Being a single mom, right? Or finding there's something wrong with the baby, that's what the fetus, right? All of those things can be changed. See, every single one of the arguments can be addressed, right, in other ways. Now, but can we judge the person who's making the decision? See, that's the different story, right? And I think we tend, when we are outside of the problem looking in, we tend to have this very judgmental view on whoever's going through that, right? This is hard, right? And I think today I see it as the biggest problem regarding abortion is that how one side or the other side cannot see how things happen on a one-on-one scenario, like an individual life, right? So, for every person who's considering this, it's like someone who's considering suicide, right? If you think about it, when you're looking outside, it's like, oh my God, why is this happening? That's, we all get all excited about this, but for the person, this is a tough thing. They're suffering. They're going through hardship. They're considering something that is so problematic, right? And we have to support and embrace them and help them instead of being the guy that would judge and say, yeah, you gotta do this, you gotta do that, you're wrong, and all this. So I think this is what we're doing today, right? Both sides, the one that's pro-life and pro-choice, are creating this almost like a battle and polarity, right? Not understanding that the problem is happening with the people that are going through it, right? We in the outside, very easy for me to go to someone and say, you're wrong, you do, you this, there's life and all that. That is not helping, right? Again, I'll stress that multiple times, right? Because reality is every single thing that is checked on the reasons why people consider abortion can be changed, can be improved, can be helped. But this takes time, it takes effort, it takes policy, it takes embracing them, right? So we cannot change the problem of abortion just by writing a law that by tomorrow, everything's gonna be, that's it, prohibited, or that. Like, okay, sure, laws have an important role. But if we as a society don't take the problem in our heart and say, okay, what can I do to help this, right? Do I know someone who's going through this, right? How can I help that individual, right? How we as a society can be more supportive, right? And then really help. So that in 50, 100 years from today, we don't even talk about this anymore, right? But if we keep kind of getting at each other and just nonsensically arguing and judging each other, this will never go away. You actually promote it, right? The more you create stress about these things, the harder it is for us to actually change it for real, right? Because a pen to paper is not going to change this. And I think this is another problem in society, right? You know, you can take examples from Canada, which is completely legalized in every scenario, which is kind of one spectrum, and in places, for example, in Brazil, which is completely prohibited in most scenarios except violence and help with the mother, right? And it's pretty clear that almost the percentage of procedures done in both countries are kind of similar, right, per capita. So you see, the enacting the law didn't work, right? So it may have created other issues that, because we're not embracing and understanding the situation better, may create other issues on both sides, right? So both countries have issues, right? So it's not that law alone that is going to actually solve the problem, right? And I think this is something we have to carefully think about. All right, let's keep going. Now let's talk about Spiritism again. Okay, let's do this. So does the fetus have a soul or spirit? Right? Kind of know that, right? We talked about this, but the answer is, question 353. Yes, there is for sure, right? But it's not necessarily. We tend to think like a 3 centimeter fetus, right? And the spirit is just inside of it, right? This is kind of, interesting visually. The reality is that the spiritual body is very fluid. It can modulate itself in shape and size in any way, right? And the spirit is also doesn't have a shape or form. So it is around, it is connected to it, right? But not necessarily acquired exact shape or fetus, right? We tend to kind of have a hard time visualizing that, right? So the spiritual must animate it, you see right there, exists as outside of it as we speak. Obviously, the spiritual is trying to explain something that's very complicated, right? Strictly speaking, the fetus has no soul inside of it, right? Just like saying, it's the only process of being accomplished. Nevertheless, the fetus is linked to the soul that will happen. Anyways, it has it, right? It's linked, connected, it's there, right? But that complete union happens, right? But with the other okay. So let's keep going. Right? So these artificial abortion, like what we're talking about today, right? Is a crime regardless of the time of conception. Yeah. So it is, and this is kind of the wrong question. This is one. Yeah. So yes, is artificial abortion a crime? Yes. So a crime is always committed, right? When the law of God is transgressed. The mother or any person involved always commits a crime while taking the life of a child before its birth, because it prevents that spirit, right, from experiencing the trials which the unborn body was to have from the instrument, right? So again, very clear, right? It doesn't matter when it happens or how it happens. Terminating that experience just planned from the spiritual perspective will have consequences, right? Now, are the consequences proportional to the situation? Yes, as always, in the divine laws, right? So we can't here say that a blank statement that for everyone that commits this, like you next time you come around, you're gonna suffer like that. No, this is not what we're talking, right? The spirits are clear, saying every time it happens, even if it's accidentally or whatever, anything that you do that goes against the life of another individual, right? Even at that side of development will have consequences, right? But going back to that same concept that we discussed before, are we able to judge and to tell exactly what's going to happen to every mother and child going through this in any scenario? No, we can't, right? Why am I saying this? Because one of the arguments that people that defend abortion is going to say, well, but what if right? Abortion is being performed because of scenario of violence or scenario of this, or the child has a disease that's incurable, right? They'll create arguments, right, to support their view that abortion is okay, right? But we also know, right, that when the spirit is, now we have tested, in fact, hundreds and hundreds of diseases, right, before the child is born. So what if, for example, someone decides that, oh, I don't want this kid because the kid has Down syndrome, right? So you can think of that. So that kid has Down syndrome for a reason. That spirit, nothing happens by chance, right? So there's definitely a reason why the fetus is developing Down syndrome, and there's a reason why that mother needs the child with Down syndrome. So that connection is being done way, way before in the spiritual world. There was plenty on it. There were like parents, kids meeting about this, right? There's all these preparatory steps. And, most likely scenarios like that, both the child and the parents will actually wipe out years and hundreds of incarnations of issues that they had before, right? With that single one event. But we decide not to take it, right? And again, the ones that are looking at only the physical thing, right? Not the spiritual. If you look at the physical, like it's a defective body, it's got an arm, right? That's the perspective. But if you put in the spiritual perspective, right? Wait, there's actually a spirit that has to go through this. There's this plan, this is agreed on, we signed a contract, this is the deal, right? And they say, no, I don't want this. Again, there's a significant consequence to that, right? And could it be worse next? Probably, most likely, right? The trial will continue, right? Now they acquired another set of debts, right? If people knew the spiritual perspective more, I think we're going to see again less and less of abortions considered, right? Because again, we tend to look at only physical things, right? Not spiritual things, which go a long before and a long after, right? The incarnation that we're looking at. Okay? So that's another very clear argument that we have for the spirits. Okay? Let's keep going. So, next one, right? Okay, so this is an important one now. So in the spiritual book, there's also a clear scenario, and I think this is a great question by Fred to the spirits, right? In case where the life of the mother, right, will be endangered by the birth of the child, is it a crime to sacrifice a child or a kid, right? So the spirits are not going to answer. They don't answer saying, yeah, it's totally fine. Yeah, kill the baby. No, they don't say that. Right? But they kind of, support the idea, right, by saying that it is better, right, to sacrifice the being who does not yet exist than the one who already exists, right? Now, in a scenario where there's obviously potentially danger to the mother's life, it is agreed in almost every country today, right, on earth, that they will stop, right, the pregnancy to save the mother. And this is an easy argument to think about, and that's what the spirit is saying, that for that spirit who is not yet incarnated, the mother could potentially have all the chances of promoting that incarnatory process, right? Maybe it's a spirit that, is kind of forcing that scenario, right? The energy of the spirit is actually disturbing the process of incarnation, right? Maybe there's some other spirits that are negatively influencing the process and damaging the mother's life, right? There's a lot of spiritual possibilities, right, of why this happens, right? But it is important for us, right, to preserve the mother's life, first, right? And that's what the spirits basically agree on, right? So this is interesting because it is exactly what most countries would, even the countries that prohibit abortion, will actually create exceptions, right? This, which showing that our law is kind of catching up, right, with the one law a little bit. Okay. Right. So let's go over to our final discussion, right? Okay. So, so far we know that obviously in Spiritism, we're completely against the concept of abortion in any situation, with the exception of what we were talking about. And the reasons are clear, that life starts at the moment of conception, the spirit's already there, there's a reincarnatory plane that's occurring, and there's consequences to interrupting that chance of that spirit to do what they have to do to this information, right? But what about, and that's what we're talking about now, what about the arguments that, most people use? We've already addressed some of them, but the first one, which is the obvious one, like everyone has the right to stay alive. In science, as you know, that the single cell that has the DNA content from the mom and the dad will be able to develop a fully complete working body. So that is by definition alive, right? It has all the codes for that, it's engineered for that, and the spirit's already connected to it, right? So that is a living organism, and it has the right to stay alive, right? Because we don't ask any of those questions to any other person, right? For everyone else, it's clear, like that's, do you have the right to stay alive? You're going to know, of course, right? So I think the problem is, again, just making sure that we understand that the life starts, right? Now, the public health argument, this is probably one that most people debate, right? And there is a little bit of interesting points on both sides of the aisle, right? So one side, that is the pro-choice, right, will argue very clearly that, enacting a complete blanket prohibition on abortions will actually spin off a number of unsafe abortions performed, right? With it, which is true, right? It will happen. We have many examples of that. Now, the data is not completely clear in many cases because there's a lot of bias involved, right? Many of the survey studies done on it have, obviously, the results have been slightly pushed towards the view of the group that is involved in the study, right? So if you take a pro-choice group that supports pro-choice, they'll actually use the data from the study to kind of spin it, right? To support a pro-choice argument and vice versa, right? But the reality is that that is true and that can happen, right? So we know for sure that, again, this idea of, like a pen to paper approach to this, like, this is what we're going to do, this is prohibited, and there off you go, it doesn't work, right? Because society and people have to change, right? It's not just the law is important, yes, right? But if we collectively don't start, spreading the word about the spiritual perspective of this, embracing people that are going through this, like supporting them, right? Psychologically, financially, right? All the things that were checked out as the most common reasons why abortions are made. Right? How can we as a society take care of that mother, right, who's struggling, right, who's considering this? This is actually in the law in Brazil. It's like if you look at the law in Brazil, they actually say this, like, promote, support, and this and this and that. So I think this is an interesting way to go. But at the same time, because of many other reasons, right, it was not fully implemented, right? We know that there's not a lot of support, right? There's a lot of judgment, right? There's a lot of issues around it. And I think that is those issues, that polarization is what probably creating most of the problem right now, right? But even the public health argument, right? I think we cannot change things immediately, right? It will take a long time. But again, promoting more understanding of what life is, right? Supporting people who are going through this, it will be the way in the spiritual perspective, right? Looking at spiritual, because if people really understood, like it's the same idea of the suicide, right? If for some reason we were able to fully grasp the notion that what happens after we commit suicide, like struggles, right? The moments of pain and anguish and suffering that we're going to go through, worse than I'm going through right now, right? Because we tend to decide of doing that because of escape route, right? So we're going to, we're going to consider taking my life because it's escape route from my suffering, right? But then we realize that the suffering actually goes worse than it before. I'm sure a lot of people would not have considered that. Same idea here. Like if you're considering performing an abortion, to consider the escape route from all the issues that were listed, right? So financial, partner, family, single life, work, diseases, like all the things are selected. And now if that family, right, understood that spiritually speaking, you're creating actually a more complicated scenario for you, I think people would actually consider less and less doing it, right? But that takes time, right? For the mother's health, we already know, even in Spirit's book, there's a clear observation about protecting mother's life, right? For the baby's health, this is one that I struggle with, right? Why, not a why, but how can we spread the word and make people understand that committing an abortion because a fetus has some diseases is actually, quite problematic, right? Because again, we're creating more challenges, right, for all of us, not only for the spirit, but also for us too, okay? And even and obviously in Spiritism, we know even examples of babies that live only 4 hours, right? But that's all they need. From leftover from previous incarnations, all they need is to complete those 2 hours, 4 days, or 2 weeks that they have planned. Maybe they committed suicide the previous incarnation, they have to come back and leave another 4 weeks here, and that's it, they will die after that, right? That's what they needed, right? And we agreed on it, we kind of signed the contract, say, yeah, I'll take that, we'll do it, right? But then when we come here, we kind of, flip that around, say, no, I'm not gonna do it, let's stop this, right? The polarization that's created around the topic, I think this is one of the big issues, right? The example that I gave, it's true, right? People really think that if they splatter a picture of a post-abortion fetus, right, into someone who defends life, they'll actually change their minds about it, to defense choice to change. No, it would just create more anger, right, and revolt, right, against the two groups, right? And whoever needs it, which is that mother who's struggling, suffering, financially, stress, depression, whatever it is, right? They're not going to help from any of those sides, right? We're not helping them. Right? The concept of reincarnatory planning, which again, if we all knew about this, it would be a lot easier to deal with this, right? Understanding the reasons that are there for this to happen, right? How it was planned, everything goes according to plan, and the benefits we're going to get from this incarnation. Right? Now, there's going to be a time that we don't have to talk about this, right? When we evolve to the point collectively, individually, that we understand that, yeah, we can't do this, but we can speed up the process a little bit, right? Now, no matter what we do, we cannot get rid of the right? Because there's a limit to a point where we can enact the idea or push the idea of, yeah, we cannot do abortions, right? We can talk about it, we can support people, we can enact laws about it, we can do anything we can, but there's going to be a moment that the free will of the person doing it will take precedent, right? And the person will do an abortion, right? And this is the moment that Spiritism, even us here in Spiritism, struggle with, right? Because we'll still look at that person in many cases and we'll, in a way, in a judgmental way, right? Instead of supporting, right? Instead of saying, hey, come, give me a hug, right? I know this is hard. We know that they're going to go through the process, that they'll have consequences. But we cannot be the one that's giving them more of negativity, right? Because in the end, who are we to judge them? Like, who are we to judge a mother, single mother, no fixed address, no income, that has a baby in the womb? Like, who are we to say to that person, out of this life that we have right now, everything we have, and living a good life, and other, who are we to tell them, yeah, don't do this, like, you don't know what you're doing? This is not helping. Not helping, right? So if we don't embrace, if we don't support, if we don't understand them, if we don't grab hands with them and walk with them, individually and as a society, none of this pro-choice and pro-life makes any sense, right? And I think we in Spiritism we are in a great position to do this, right? Obviously in Spiritism, we're pro-life. Yeah, of course. Pro-life is a bad word because everyone is pro-life. Like, that makes no sense, right? But in the context that we in Spiritism believe that, every incarnation, every spirit has the right to life, right? In any scenario, right? But at the same time, we can't make the problem worse, right? By the way we address it, right? And how we evolve, right? In the world of evolution, right? Now, we have many examples. So in the book, in the book, Action and Reaction, there's an interesting passage, and I recommend you guys reading it. That they're talking about abortions, right, from the spiritual perspective, right? And they actually show vivid descriptions, right, of trauma from the spiritual side, right? So the mentor is talking about, um, um, one of the passages that they're going to say, so the woman who willfully corrupted her reproductive center, right, by doing the abortion, right, will in the future receive more like damaged spirits or troubled spirits, right, incarnated, and will actually have to give more energies to those spirits to make them come, right, to this. And so in other words, if you think about this, the more you do this, like the more challenging the trial is going to be somehow, right? Because now you're going to have to be exposed to sin. And to a point there, we're going to break it, we're going to do it, right? We're going to take the jump, right? We're going to do it. But, the spirits talk about, like offering the chance of coming back and for reincarnating spirits that are spirits that are still stuck, right? In a lot of negativity, right? Dealing with challenges with family, child, and like all sorts of things. They go through that, right? And they describe um, exactly what happens from the spiritual perspective. And it's kind of shocking, right, to see that. So that's one of the readings there. It is in Evolution Two Worlds, chapter 17, if I'm correct. Also talk about abortions and miscarriages, which are actually very nicely written, and it matches almost perfectly with the scientific evidence we have today, right? So those are the two readings that I recommend. So in summary, yes. So in Spiritism, there's no doubt, there's no question about it, right? We believe that abortion, will cause negative consequences for everyone involved, and every spirit that is incarnated has the right to complete the duties or the roles that they've been assigned in this incarnation, right? But at the same time, particularly us in Spiritism, cannot be the ones judging, attacking, or making the problem worse, right? We really have to use the knowledge that we have to start a conversation. So, support the people who are struggling with that, right? Talk about, the spiritual perspective of things that people forget, right? And not take place in a combative environment, not join some sort of combative efforts, but rather supportive action, right? Of making people understand what's happening, supporting them immediately. So one day we'll actually change this, right? As a society, right? Together, okay? All right, so that's what we have to talk about today. I don't know if you guys have any questions about it.
Thank you, Marco. Anyone has anything, any comment?
I'm quite impressed about the numbers actually.
Yeah.
It's like, this is much bigger than COVID, right?
Yeah.
It's like every year.
Yeah.
It's quite impressive. And also, I think the way that we talk, I think you're very right. And the polarization is not helping actually. So we don't talk about, well, actually, I think the humanity did a very poor job talking about COVID, right? Pro vaccine,
Yeah.
against vaccine. So
Yeah.
we are trying always to polarize
Yes.
things that are so much deeper
Mhm.
than that. And I think this dialogue is like, it's taking the same path. And the fact that it's like we should step aside and take the lenses of the individual who is passing through that is it's the right way.
No, that's a good point. And, there's so many arguments, right, as we know, like there's the argument of women's reproductive right and, the idea that they have reproductive bodies. Like, those are all interesting and points, right? But they're superseded by the fact that we all have a right to live, and also, most importantly, as you mentioned, we're forgetting actually who needs to be like helped and, down the line, right? There's all those beautiful rallies about things like this, but most people in the valley actually have no connection, right, to the challenges of what we're talking about. Right? And again, that's just become empty polarity, right? Which I'm gonna take it.
Any other comment? No? All right, thank you.
Yes.
So thank you for those who joined us online. We'll get ready for